I think that given, Amy, that you're able to stay on a little bit longer, I think what we'll do is we'll hop over to Andrea. If you could present, there's a few different projects that we're kind of engaging with. Right now, EcoTrust has got in a proposal that really could benefit all of our institutions with NRCan, and she's going to describe some of those and give us some ideas about if that funding comes through. We always know there's never any guarantees, but how it will benefit us. So I think you're able to share your screen if you'd like, or I can share your slides. Let me know what I'd like to.
I think I can. We'll see if this works.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you very much, Donald. And I always, I don't often talk about my history, but I worked for many, many years at BCIT, both on the academic side, but also facilities management side, running our sustainability work there. So I know the world that you work in quite well and how rewarding and frustrating it can be in so many ways. So thanks for inviting me here today. I have quite a bit of content to go through, but I'm going to keep it short and provide these slides for your follow-up if you want to look at it in more detail. I have been with Alberta EcoTrust for just a few months now. Before that, I was with the City of Edmonton supporting their corporate climate journey. And then, as I mentioned before that, working with post-secondaries and nonprofits in BC supporting our climate work. What I'm hoping to cover today is just a little bit about who we are, Alberta EcoTrust, for those of you who don't know us, what a building information exchange and deep energy retrofit accelerator are, because those are two projects we're working on that will hopefully support the work that you do. And then a little bit about the two grant applications that Donald mentioned, and then leave it open for any questions that you might have. I'm also very happy to come back and talk with you again. So if you have any, if you have any questions that come up after our presentation, you can either reach out to me or I can come back and chat again. All right, so Alberta EcoTrust is a charity that was founded almost 30 years ago. It's a ENGO and corporate partnership. So what we really were focusing on doing when we were developed was figuring out how to advance a sustainable future in Alberta while having, big oil and gas and other big industry at the table, along with the ENGOs doing work. So we focus our work in three different places: nature-based solutions, climate resilience and emissions reductions, and circular economy. We have four key pillars of work that we do, and you may have seen us, most people know us for our granting work, which has been around for quite some time. We've worked with a lot of post-secondaries over the years, supporting initiatives that they're undertaking under our grant programs. But we also do impact investing. So we're a low carbon city group, I guess, that's received funding from the federal government to support work in Edmonton and Calgary around meeting our climate targets. And so we have a large endowment from that initiative. The endowment funds our grants, and it also allows us to do some impact investing, which we're just moving into right now. We've been doing strategic engagement for many decades. And the other piece of work that we've taken on is foundation-led initiatives. And what that really means is when we see that there's a gap in the ecosystem of things that we could do to support sustainability sort of being taken on in Alberta, we often fill that gap with our own projects that we run with partners. And so the work that I'm going to talk today fall into that foundation-led initiatives piece that we're taking on. So the two big projects that we're working on all fall under this umbrella of a building information exchange. That's a working title right now. The one that's leading in the polls is NetBIX, as the Net Zero Building Information Exchange. But essentially the idea behind this is that we are working on developing a platform to accelerate net zero building in Alberta is really our focus. We are registered in Alberta, and so to work in Alberta, so we are not really working outside of the Alberta jurisdiction. However, everything we're doing is we're planning on making as accessible as possible online. And so that means that, and for all the climate zones that we see in Alberta, so we actually will have a lot of information that's quite applicable in other jurisdictions. It's just that we sort of have to set our bounds of specific work within Alberta. The intent of this initiative is to really work on new and existing buildings. So it would include retrofits as well as new construction for both Part 3, as the code calls it, and Part 9 buildings, which means big commercial, institutional buildings, as well as single family residential. Multifamily fits in there as well. And essentially, we're working to make sure all of these buildings can get to emissions neutral or net zero buildings. And the way that we do that is through sharing of innovative ideas, best practices, lessons learned. It's kind of like building an ecosystem of capacity building or knowledge for an existing industry. So really trying to help augment existing training that exists and existing capacity building, and figuring out, where the gaps are if there isn't training out there. I won't spend as much time on these next two slides, but basically it's really about navigating and reducing barriers to cost-effective low emissions buildings, accelerating knowledge, advancing the market, and fostering innovation through demo projects and research and training. And then another piece that the industry is really keen for us to be able to do, and part of the reason we're doing this and not a government organization, is that they want us to be able to liaison with government who's setting code and standards around emissions neutral buildings, and provide information to them from industry that is really focused on, like, look, we've tried this, this works, this doesn't work. We need to make sure that the code and policies reflect that. So that's one of the roles that we're going to play, is that intermediary discussion piece. If for those of you who are familiar with ZEBEX in British Columbia, the model that we're approaching for this initiative is similar to that, but would be absolutely sort of a unique to Alberta version of it, whatever the needs we need here. But essentially, we'll be providing capacity building, peer-to-peer networking events, training, resources such as case studies, reports, playbooks, and all of those different pieces, with a really solid web presence so that people can find all that information and access it. And we don't want to, we're not going to pretend that we're an academic institution or a training institute in that sense. What we want to do is we want to work with all of you folks on that kind of thing. So I'll talk a little bit more about that partnership, but essentially we're hoping to be able to help augment the work that you do and support it as you grow from an academic perspective. I'll also talk about your actual buildings, because that's part of another initiative we're doing. But from the academic side, we're hoping to be able to do things like provide actual curriculum for you to use in training if you want to, help identify the places where we're missing training, develop potentially mobile training units if you want to do some hands-on training and we've got to get it somewhere remote. Maybe we fund you as a school to develop that and help take it around the province. So we've got lots of different ways we could work too. We'll have to sort of think about that together, but the intent is to sort of help identify the gaps both in knowledge and location for how we build emissions neutral buildings in Alberta, and then try to fill those gaps with while supporting all of you. The next initiative, and I'll come back to that one a little bit, but the next initiative we're working on is what we call a deep energy retrofit accelerator. And this initiative is actually not on the academic side at all, or the capacity building as much. It's more focusing on helping people do deep energy retrofits to buildings. And so the idea is that we're going to help build an ecosystem in Alberta. There's bits and pieces of it that absolutely already exist, and experts already doing some great work, but sort of build that ecosystem and support people through the whole process of doing deep energy retrofits in buildings. The idea here, and this is what I'll talk a bit more in the grant application, but this is what we propose to the federal government, is that we're essentially going to have sort of three big pieces of work happening. The middle stuff in pink there is what Alberta EcoTrust Foundation will be gearing up to do through the funding provided there. We're going to help aggregate and screen projects for deep energy retrofits. And so the grant funding we were receiving would fully fund that process. And we would provide human resources support to help you like assess your buildings, your portfolio buildings, figure out which ones are best candidates for deep energy retrofits, essentially. The second step in this process would be to do deep energy retrofit plans. And we know it really depends on the group we're working with. Some people have capital dollars ready to go, and so they just need a plan with sort of having someone come through and do an assessment of their buildings to figure out what they need to be doing. Often we need support figuring out how to get to deep emissions rather than just a lighting retrofit or some VFDs put on some fans or pumps that we have. So that's really what we'll be focusing on, is the candidates that are good for deep energy retrofits and how we plan for that. We know that sometimes it'll be that we have to plan it in over a multi-year renewal cycle. And so that's the other piece we're looking to start supporting. So we would help you design like a pathway to emissions neutral for your building over a potentially multi-budget cycle or multi-year replacement cycle that you have. And that work, we would provide partial funding. Right now, we're looking at about 50% of funding to do those deep studies and those sort of long-term plans with business cases attached and everything that you would need. We would also provide extensive coaching services or support services to help you through that process and understanding like what you need to do, what does that whole process look like, and that would be free of charge, that support that we would provide there. And then another piece we provide free of charge will be coaching around financing. So how do you find financing? How do you find grants? How do you apply for those grants and financing? Our team would be well versed in that and be able to support you through it. We know that universities in particular and municipalities, what we call the MUSH sector, often really struggle with the financing piece because they can often get really good access to cheap capital. So if they're trying to get financing from a third party, like how do you justify that? So we've got actually an entire section in our work plan with the federal government to work for through the unique barriers that universities are running into, to try and help them figure out how they would actually, procure these processes and finance them. So we're excited to pick your brains on those barriers that you currently run into in your procurement processes and all of that to try and to help you through that. So that being said, we actually have even more money for 10 projects in the MUSH sector to help them all the way through to detailed design for projects. So we might be able to fully fund detailed design on a handful of unique projects with the intent of trying to figure out how to remove those barriers to implementation. So that's what we've identified there. Our team would also provide support around coaching around actual project implementation. Most of you folks probably have great project management teams for doing construction management, but we will often run into building owners that have like one or two multifamily residential buildings that have never really done much more than basic plumbing and emergency work, and so we would probably provide more support on how you actually manage a project in that sense. And then what we call monitoring and verification, which most of you are probably aware of, but making sure that we understand the deep energy work that's done. So that's what we would provide as a service. And then we have all these other partner pieces that we're working on. And one of them would be the training piece that I just mentioned to you. Again, we probably would be providing curriculum funding support to support the deep energy retrofit world. So the CAF and the DRE grants, I'm just realizing I have very little time left, so I'll speed it up a little bit here. But the CAF and the DRE grants are two funding opportunities that came from the federal government. One is to advance code adoption across Canada, and the other one is to support a deep energy retrofit accelerator. So we are expecting to hear back from the grants about whether or not we receive the funding this summer. with hopefully signing the agreements in the fall. My experience with NRCan is you take whatever they've said and you add at least 6 months. So I wouldn't be surprised if we don't have the funding signed up until the end of 2023 or possibly even the beginning of 2024, unfortunately. We do have 3+, they say 4 years, but it's 3 years to implement this really until March 31st, 2027. So we've got a big team sort of planned to staff up and implement all of this work. As a very quick brief here, we have put in the funding ask for the academic side to pay for both curriculum analysis and support and partner facilities. So like maybe you would host a training location for us and we would co-brand it together as a net zero emissions center of excellence or something like that. We've asked for about $500,000 from the CAF grant to support that, as well as a partial full-time employee on our side to support relationships with all of you folks as we move this forward. Similarly, for the DRE grant, which was a bigger ask in total, we've asked for about $700,000 to support those same activities, as well as most of a full-time employee to support all of this work as we move forward. And then the other piece, as I mentioned, we're supporting up to 75 buildings in the MUSH sector through the getting their plans developed, like partially funding their plans. So we'll take on 750 to do that initial assessment. So that part, all of your buildings could probably come through, or a large portion of your buildings could come through that initial screening activity. But then when we pick the best ones for deep energy retrofits, we have about 75 buildings planned to be able to partially fund through that process. And then, as I mentioned, only 10 would be fully funded through the whole process to try and debunk some of or get through some of the barriers that we're identifying. So how I'm hoping we work together, we're going to need on the academic side, we're going to need advisors for like where the barriers are, how we're planning on doing the curriculum development, all of those different pieces. And on the facilities maintenance side, which sounds like most of you folks are more aligned with, we're keen to find some projects to support through that project pipeline. We obviously will need someone on your side running the projects, but that's why we have coaching services. That's why we have the funding to support you through this process. So once we hear about the money associated with that project, we would then move forward with providing, like signing people up essentially for the project and the process that move forward. So that's it. I would love feedback on this, possibly by email, just because I do have to run. I'm really sorry. I wish I could have spent more time with you. And maybe we can think a little bit about how we continue to work together. Maybe I come to a few more of these meetings and give you updates on how we're doing. I'd love to learn how to engage with the academic sides of your institution. If you guys have contacts there, or folks have contacts there. Yeah, so that's where I'm at. Yeah.
Excellent. No, I understand, unfortunately, but that you may have to go, I guess, right away. Is that the case? Can you answer a couple questions, or do you need to pop off?
Yeah, let me just send an email very, very quickly here, what people think about their questions, and I'll let them know I'll be 5 minutes for my next meeting.
Appreciate that, because I'm sure, I mean, I have a ton of questions. I think I want to keep it open because you and I can talk later. But yeah, and again, folks, feel free to reach out to Andrea if you can, copy me or send me your questions and I can compile them. But does anybody have some questions off the bat that you'd like to ask?
Not a confirmation, I guess. So at this point in time, there's nothing's really happening. Like you're waiting to see what happens with these grants and then proceeding.
Yes, that's a big, from the grant side, there we are moving forward with the building information exchange, so that capacity building piece out of the City of Edmonton focus. So City of Edmonton has provided us with a bunch of money to move that forward. So if your institution's in Edmonton, absolutely, we're like super keen to work with you on that piece. If you're not in Edmonton, I still would love to talk to you if you happen to be like Paul, what you were talking about with your net zero campus, like we would love to highlight you and elevate that information and share it with the world about how like the fantastic you're doing. So if anyone has existing net zero buildings on their campus or is looking to build them or is doing deep energy retrofits, please let me know. And our team will build a case study and like co-brand it with you and be able to share it with the world. That's why we're here to do that work. So that'll be like the interim piece is like, let's just figure out what sharing needs to be done. The other thing I'd love to hear from you all about eventually, no big rush, is like, how can we help build your team's capacity to do this work? So if you like want workshops on specific topics or online seminars or training events, like send me what you want and we'll build stuff that will meet the need of industry. That's the whole point of what we're trying to do there. So.
Excellent. No, and it's always exciting to have somebody who's coming with resources for us that can really support us. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity. Any other questions that we can kind of quickly get off or came up, Amy?
Maybe just a comment around next steps. So I think we have a Sustainable Campus Collaborative meeting in August, and I realize that's before you're going to hear about the grant, or maybe right around the time you're going to hear about the grant. So maybe we can kind of take some time to think about questions and possibilities and reconvene in August if there's time in that meeting.
That would be perfect for me. Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah, the timing for that would be great. And, you know, if there's a small group of us who want to get together prior to that, kind of prepare for a bigger conversation and maybe kind of formalize how we approach that. So yeah, that's a great idea, Amy, and we can leave that open for that.
Yeah, and I just had another thought before you leave, Andrea, has EcoTrust connected with Colleges and Institutes Canada or Universities Canada? Because I'd be happy to put you in touch, because I know at least CICAN, Colleges and Institutes Canada, is doing a fair bit of work on that training and curriculum side. And I believe they received funding from one of the federal departments, so it could have been Environment and Climate Change Canada or NRCan, but just there's a possibility to like build on that existing work. So I can put you in touch if you're interested.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. Yeah. And I think one of the things I'll do is when we have our web presence running, hopefully in the next month or so here, and once we have like a place where you can sign up and like, you know, I just want to be updated or whatever, I'll send that through Donald to send out to all of you so that you can choose how you want to participate in the knowledge sharing. So.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks so much, Andrea, for taking the time. I know you have to run, but just getting the information out there and starting to connect and start to think about how it can help us is really valuable. So I appreciate that. And thanks for the work you guys are doing to apply for these grants and you know, thinking about what our needs are, because and I have to say it fits in really well. Our kind of primary speaker is from Honeywell, and they have a whole kind of idea about how to finance these projects. So there'll probably be conversations ongoing about how we can take advantage and make all these things work for us.
Absolutely. Perfect. Okay. Thanks so much for the opportunity, and enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Yeah. Look forward to talking soon. Thanks. Okay. So I think that I think the most appropriate thing to talk about now is Amy, would you be able to give us an update?
Sure. Yeah, and I can keep this pretty short, but happy to answer questions as well. And there's at least 2 folks in the virtual room that are working with me on this project. So Jason and Elena, feel free to jump in if I miss anything, or if you want to clarify anything. And there's also a couple of folks who are representing institutions that are involved, even though they're not the primary contact. So sort of the impetus for this project is we're looking at our scope 2 emissions, so the emissions associated with our purchased electricity. And I know other institutions have explored other solutions. So Aaron at Red Deer Polytechnic, for example, I know you have a lot of on-site generation, and that's expanding. At Bow Valley College, we don't have that, I don't know if I call it a luxury, but we don't really have that options because we have 3 buildings in downtown Calgary, and we get a lot of shading from the other buildings, and there's just some sort of strange regulations, and we just don't have a lot of space. So we did a very initial assessment a few years ago, and I think even if we covered our roof and solar panels, it would only cover about 3% of our annual electricity use. So about a year ago, we started exploring in this group the idea of doing an aggregated or collective power purchase agreement. So the idea, and I'm not an expert in this, but it would be that we would essentially invest in new renewables being added to the grid, whether it's through a solar farm or a wind farm. And these are getting really, I would say, popular, as far as I'm aware, in the private sector. So you'll see a lot of banks and companies, Amazon, RBC, are buying these power purchase agreements to meet their sustainability targets. And there are examples of public institutions doing this as well, but it just seems like there's fewer examples. So I forget exactly how the conversation started, but this has been swirling for a while. So over the last, I would say 6 to 9 months, we started to have conversations to say like, okay, let's look at this. Like, let's actually look at this rather than just sort of talking about it. So there's a consortium of 7 institutions and school boards. So it's Bow Valley College, NorQuest, MacEwan University, Keyano College, Portage College, the Calgary Board of Education, and the Edmonton Public School Board. So the 7 of us have decided we want to explore this. So what we're doing, our first step is we're hiring a consultant to do a really in-depth financial analysis and business case and see, is this the right step forward? There's a lot of things that we're trying to balance, right? There's the increased risk, like it can be a risky process, but it can also save institutions a lot of money depending on what's happening in the electricity market. And it would help us drastically reduce our scope 2 emissions, which Bow Valley College, we have a lot of emissions tied up in our electricity. So that's the RFP that Donald mentioned that's currently open, and I can post a link in the chat as well. Is the RFP is just to hire a consultant to do this financial analysis for us. And our thinking is that when that analysis is done, and if it does say, yes, an aggregated PPA is the right way to go, then we would start exploring what that looks like. And that would probably be at least a year or 2 of contract negotiations and figuring out who the developer of that PPA would actually be. So we are in technically this first stage, but I am proud of what it's taken to get here, because what we've realized sort of early on in this, even just the RFP process, is post-secondaries have done a lot of purchasing collectively in the past, but what usually happens is we will post an RFP, let's say for office supplies, and once the vendor has been chosen, then each post-secondary will sign a separate contract with that vendor. In this case, we didn't want to do that. We're hiring a consultant to do, let's say, 2 to 3 months of work maximum. We don't want them to have to go through 7 separate contracts. So this is the part that took kind of the longest to get aligned, but it's also a really good learning for us, because if we do pursue a PPA, it's going to be much more complicated than the process we just went through. So it was a really good learning opportunity for us. So yeah, we now have like a consortium agreement so that we can go out and sort of purchase as, work with a consultant as sort of a single entity in that way. I think that's all I wanted to kind of provide. I guess, the RFP closes on May 17th. And then, of course, we'll go through the scoring process together. So there's a representative from each institution on the scoring panel for the RFP. And then our hope is to work with that consultant over the summer and get a report in the early fall that we can then each take back to our individual institutions. And maybe one other thing I should mention is the reason that we're doing this collectively is, as far as my understanding, in order for a power purchase agreement to be sort of financially viable for the developer, they need to have 40,000 megawatt hour minimum. Bow Valley College purchases between 8,000 and 9,000 a year. So alone, we cannot buy into a power purchase agreement. I don't think we'd find a developer that would want to work with us because we're too small. But collectively, we represent a huge purchasing opportunity and could actually invest in quite a large solar wind farm that would cover the electricity of our 7 different organizations. So sorry, that was a bit all over the place, but hopefully it's useful. Maybe I'll see Jason or Elena if you want to add anything to what I've shared here.
Thumbs up, Amy. I thought that you summarized that really well. And I just wanted to give kudos to BVC for their persistence and patience in dealing with all the institutions and their approval processes. So yeah, it's definitely been a learning curve for all of us.
Yeah, and I would agree. No, well said, both Amy and Elena. Yeah, nothing further to add. Pretty excited to be on the journey.
Mhm.
Yeah. Bonnie, do you have a question?
Yeah, just quickly. So Amy, is the intention to try to procure 100% renewable electricity for the whole amount that we're talking about?
That's a great question. So I think for Bow Valley College, that's our intent. We would like to purchase 100%. It might not be the same intent for every organization. So
Okay.
I think, and this is where it's going to get complicated, there will be sort of separate guidelines for each of the institutions if we do move forward with the PPA. There is a consortium of Northern Alberta school boards that did this several years ago. And the way that they set up their PPA contracts is that, for example, some school boards retain the environmental attributes that come along with renewable energy, while some of them sell them. So there are ways that like different institutions can set up how much they want to purchase. Bow Valley, I'll just speak for Bow Valley, we want to purchase 100% ideally, if it works out.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, between these institutions, even with the small proportion, particularly with the CBE and the Edmonton Public School Board on board, they have hundreds of thousands of megawatts. Really appreciate both CBE and Edmonton Public School Board in kind of joining with us in this process. It's really forward thinking, and I think can have all sorts of different benefits. So from my perspective, there's the benefit of energy procurement and cleaning that, but there's also, I think, really significant, all the developers I've spoken with are desperate for good staff and technicians and business, all aspects of it. This is a huge and growing business in Alberta. So our educational institutions are really uniquely placed to kind of feed that opportunity to our training side, our academic side, and really, help this as well. So it's another exciting part of it. Any other questions or that the folks have, or any saying?
Yeah, the institutions involved, did they already have any electricity procurement policies around hedging or similar long-term contracts?
So you mean, sorry, just long-term purchasing for electricity?
Yes.
I'm not sure about the hedging, but
yeah.
Yes. So that was something that we learned through this process, because this was something that delayed us for a long time. We all have different contracts right now, and we're all with different utilities at the moment. So is this going to affect that? I've been told by several consultants that isn't supposed to impact the process, so we could roll in those existing contracts into the PPA. So as those existing contracts end, we would sort of pick up the PPA. That's probably not the correct legal or technical language, but that's my understanding of it. Was that your question, Julian?
Yeah, that was it. It was like, is this something entirely new to the institutions, or obviously there's some long-term contracts that do exist. How is this different? How does that affect it? And obviously that led to a lot of discussion here.
Yeah. And I think it's going to be ongoing because it's complex.
Yeah. And the other piece of it, when you come to the end of this RFP process and you get some results, would you be able to share those at least to some degree and have an opportunity for institutions that maybe may be interested at that point in being part of the consortium? Is there potential for that?
I believe so. I don't want to speak on behalf of the consortium because it's not something we've talked about in detail, but I think we would love for this to be a learning opportunity for all of us and not just the 7 that are involved. And maybe it happens that all 7 organizations don't want to pursue a PPA after looking at the consulting report, and some organizations do. So it doesn't mean that the 7 that are pursuing this consulting or this financial analysis are going to be the 7 that are moving forward. But it would just have to be a conversation, I think, as a group to make sure that the process is fair. So like we had to have a conversation with how are we going to pay for this? Are we each going to equally pay, like split the cost 7 ways? Or do larger institutions end up paying more? And we decided just let's all just split it equally for this point. But maybe that has to change moving forward into the PPA. So.
Yes, lots more details to work out, but yeah, again, thanks to you folks for kind of talking about it today and for all the work that's been done. And I think that's going to benefit your institutions, but potentially many others and all of us in Alberta. So exciting stuff. I think that where we need to go now, we're kind of on schedule. If anybody has a burning question, maybe I can give you another minute or two. Would anybody like to ask one last question of Amy before she may have to leave relatively soon as well? So feel free to reach out to us, to Amy or myself, or any of the other individuals that might be involved in this, to ask questions. Again, it's another exciting initiative and really appreciate it. So the next speaker that we have, and we've got a pretty packed agenda today, is a representative from Honeywell, Emily Westall, who is working with Honeywell, and they're a huge organization, just kind of massive. And where they can fit in potentially is around the financing of large scale projects. So I think there's really strong potential fit with what we're looking to do with EcoTrust to kind of really complement where we're going with that. And so without any further ado, I'll turn the floor over to you, Emily.
Awesome. Thank you, Donald. And thank you for the opportunity to join your quarterly meeting here and to present to the group. So my name is Emily Westall. I'm a national growth leader for Honeywell. I've been with Honeywell for about 5 years, and prior to that, I was with Johnson Controls, also in their energy division. My academic background is environmental science, and I did my postgraduate in sustainability management. I'm not part of the sales team here at Honeywell. I'm focused rather on national strategic initiatives across the country, including market research, strategic partnerships, marketing and communications outreach, government grants and funding opportunities, working with various levels of government on current and future funding opportunities, to name a few. So just a quick introduction to myself, and then I am going to share my screen here. And just let me know when you can see it.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, perfect. All right. So with that, I'm hoping today just to provide you with a high level understanding of the performance contracting business and opportunities in Canada. Given my background and work with different colleges and universities and school boards across the country, I'm going to start just by walking through some of the market trends and challenges as I've seen them recently and understood them. I'm then going to walk through what performance contracting is, how it works, what these projects typically look like. I'll highlight some of the most common barriers, objections, and challenges that we see, as long as some suggested solutions and mitigation strategies for those, and then take a turn to the financing side and discuss some existing and emerging funding opportunities for these types of projects, including some grants and incentives, and then just end on a few case studies. So this is just meant to be a high-level overview. I won't get into a lot of detail, but happy to answer any questions along the way that anybody might have. So just starting out with some general trends and challenges, pretty much in all of my recent executive level meetings, there have been very similar themes. The most common being a rising backlog of deferred maintenance and a lack of funding and even decreasing capital budgets to address that, all while seeing increasing costs and increasing commitments to sustainability on campuses. So I think this kind of current environment is leading everyone to start exploring a different approach from the historical, capital budget approvals every year for one-off projects, which is there's really no way to put a dent in deferred maintenance or start on these ambitious net zero targets and plans that everyone has in place now by doing it with that model if it's just a very limited amount of capital funding available. Just as an example, I mean, most recently, I met with a university in Ontario who has over 400 million in deferred maintenance. And not only are they not getting an increase in capital budgets to approach it, their budgets were actually cut this year because of missed enrollment targets. Their foreign student enrollment was down, largely, I think, a trailing effect of COVID. And to make up for the gap, they just cut budgets across the board. So the VP of facilities now has no ability to address the issue of deferred maintenance. Meanwhile, his board and senior executives are looking to the university to start, pushing down the path of building their master sustainability plan for the campus. So all of this to say, I think these are all common issues. It's easy to get overwhelmed, I think, being in this position. And it is everywhere, but there are ways to look at things more holistically, and there are solutions that can be explored to kind of start looking at this in more of a comprehensive way instead of just one-off. So with that, I'm just gonna walk through at a high level what an energy performance contract is, which is by no means a new concept. This model has been around for over 45 years in Canada. I think it's just getting a renewed sense of interest now with the idea of building out these larger scale, master plans with the lack of funding to address them. And then also with some of these emerging funding mechanisms that I'm going to talk about later, they're highly focused on performance contracting. So what is it? An energy performance contract is a performance-based financing mechanism. That is it in its entirety. It's a financing mechanism that enables an organization to design, build, and secure financing to address energy efficiency, infrastructure renewal, and most recently, their decarbonization needs. So it's really a low-risk turnkey service. And the very important part is that it delivers guaranteed energy and cost savings on the back end. So using an EPC approach, you can then leverage the technical and financial capacity of your ESCO partner, your energy services company partner, to develop, design, install, and arrange for financing for these projects. So kind of turnkey beginning to end. And there are multiple financing options that are available, which I am going to talk about later. But generally speaking, there's a lender, whether it's third party or the ESCO, who covers the initial capital costs, and then the client repays the ESCO or the lender over a specified period of time from the utility cost savings. And then once that contract closes, all of the ongoing savings from energy, greenhouse gas emission reduction, and utility costs go directly to the client. So just a few highlights here and how this differs from kind of that traditional design build approach. The model essentially allows you to pay for the upgrades through utility and carbon tax savings that are generated. This means there's no need to tap into those existing capital budgets, and those can be preserved for other needs. So there's no upfront capital required, no capital budgets. It's essentially a self-funded model and a budget neutral approach with the contractually guaranteed savings on the back end, which kind of alleviates some of the risk associated. And then on top of that, as I mentioned a couple of times now, there's some financing opportunities that are emerging that are using the EPC model as their foundation, like the Canada Infrastructure Bank and its aggregators, which I'll go into a little bit later. So what's included? As mentioned, these projects are comprehensive in nature. We don't go in and look at just lighting or just controls or just, a one-off boiler replacement. To be completely frank, if you're looking at one-off measures, you can definitely do that in-house, and you could probably do it cheaper. So if where we start to come into play, and other ESCOs like us, is when you're looking at the facility holistically and looking to build out a more comprehensive project. So one of the nice things about this approach is that projects can be financed over a longer period of time in order to tackle as much as possible under this one kind of comprehensive umbrella. So you can leverage the quicker paybacks of things like your LED lighting retrofits, and then blend it in with some of the longer term payback items or the no payback items, replacing roofs and a lot of the building envelope and things like that, to in the end build a blended business case that can stand and make sense. So these are just some examples of some of the measures that we would look at. This isn't by no means a comprehensive list, just to give you a bit of a sample, but like I mentioned, we'll look at building envelope, we'll look at control systems, updated lighting, updated HVAC systems, sub-metering, fuel switching, which obviously is dependent on geography. That's a big one in Ontario right now, and in Atlantic Canada. Looking at electrification for carbon reductions, and then alternative energy, we'll look at solar walls, geothermal, depending on the climate, geography, and what makes sense. And then now what we're seeing more and more is the net zero targets and goals. Some are as ambitious as 2030, and then a lot are modeling the government at a closer to 2050 goal. But energy performance contracting can actually be used as the sort of that financing mechanism even in your net zero planning. So where a project is focused on greenhouse gas reduction goals and targets, in addition to deferred maintenance and energy efficiency. So in these cases, we'll typically work collaboratively with our clients to develop a campus master sustainability plan. So usually this approach, it makes the most sense to start with fully optimizing existing infrastructure and equipment efficiency and replacing aged infrastructure with more efficient equipment. And then there's a new baseline to right size any potential renewables or storage. I think a lot of the times this kind of gets out of order where people start looking at renewable energy, but they don't optimize their current efficiency first. So then they end up with sort of a generation option that is oversized or not right sized. So that's typically the first approach. And then there's, as I mentioned, there's also fuel switching in geographies like Ontario and Newfoundland, where the electricity is mostly hydro and clean. A lot of the times that's the best path towards decarbonization. In the case of out west, fuel switching electrification would not be considered, but it would more be just the first and the third step there of looking at more efficient equipment, and then also looking at renewable generation and distributed storage opportunities. So just to give you an example of how this can work in a performance contracting approach or model. So we're working with Calgary College on developing a sustainability master plan right now that's focused on achieving a net zero campus. So part of the development of the sustainability plan is developing a realistic pathway, not just a study that's not feasible or constructible, but a realistic pathway with near-term, medium-term, and long-term measures in order to achieve their goals. So it's really a multi-phased approach, which can be seen in this graphic here. So each of these bars represents a phase in the project over a certain timeline. And then the blue line here is their do nothing emissions if they don't take action. And then the yellow line is if we implement each of these phases on this desired timeline, is the emissions going down over time and ultimately hitting their targets. Each of these phases represents a different combination of measures, some of which make sense in the near term because they're cost savings initiatives that can be implemented now, and there's a business case that can be leveraged. Others will make sense depending on the carbon tax, and as the carbon tax increases over time, they'll become feasible financially, and then others are grant dependent. So you can identify measures that could potentially have huge greenhouse gas reduction, but are not financially feasible at present. And then if a grant comes out that could be applicable, then it becomes something that you can explore again. But either way, the general point is that you can build out a multi-phased approach and start with identifying your goals, assessing the current infrastructure, what's been done to date in terms of energy efficiency projects, and then developing this kind of realistic phased path to net zero. And all of it can be financed through a combination of the savings and grants. And then I'm sure oh, this sounds great, but there's probably a few people on the call shaking their heads because it's something that you've either explored and it hasn't been successful, or you're sitting there saying, well, we can't take on debt. So I just want to highlight some of these barriers and challenges up front. Because it's, I've had many conversations over the years, and these do come up frequently. And I think there's some approaches and solutions as well that can be taken. So the largest barrier by far is always related to funding the project. So especially as we get into these larger scale comprehensive EPC projects, most public institutions don't have capital budgets available to allocate to these projects. So as mentioned before, this is, I think, where a performance contract can help solve that challenge. I'll get more into the financing, but the overarching point is that undertaking an EPC approach allows you to tap into existing utility budgets to fund projects through the savings stream generated without the need for capital. And there's a but here and a big asterisk, because there are areas and certain markets that actually cannot take on debt. So what happens in areas where there are debt restrictions or a lack of debt capacity so clients can't borrow? There are alternative financing approaches which have been deemed off balance sheet that I'll get into a little bit later. So there are options to explore that have been deemed off balance sheet by external auditors for a number of institutions. And also there have been ESCOs ourselves, as well as some others in the market who have successfully built business cases and brought them forward to the provincial governments to grant permissions to borrow. So in cases where there's provincial restrictions on debt, working in partnership to build out the business case, showing that there's a guaranteed savings stream with very low risk in terms of borrowing, has paid off in terms of getting an exclusion from the province and the approval to borrow. So just because there is a debt restriction, I don't want you to think that means that you're absolutely excluded from this type of approach. I think it's still worth exploring, as there are a number of different options that are available. And then next up, after financing, I think, there's some organizational challenges internally for our clients. One of the keys to success, I think, in large projects is open communication among various stakeholders to make sure that everyone understands the project, there's support, there's buy-in. I think there's challenges that can be faced when one group, for example, someone from capital projects is making decisions or recommendations in a silo without bringing in operations and finance and procurement, which are all departments that should be involved in these types of projects. So a recommendation, I think, to overcome this is at a very early stage to do an opportunity assessment workshop where you have participation and buy-in from key stakeholders across multiple departments. This way that everyone is aware of the approach, the goals, they all have a say in building the solution, and it shouldn't come as a surprise later on down the road. And then next, I think it's just a general feeling of a lack of resources. You're looking at a large scale comprehensive project, feeling like you don't have the capacity to take on a project of this magnitude. I think, this is where that turnkey approach is really helpful. The ESCOs try to alleviate that stress by taking on the majority of the work associated. So it should actually theoretically be less work for you and for your team when you have a company essentially acting as a general contractor, arranging for the financing, identifying the measures, doing all of the project management on the implementation side and the construction side, including procurement of equipment and all of the site coordination. So the ESCO partners should really be an extension of your team and help to increase your capacity to take on projects. And then I think there's a bit of a misconception that that the organization won't have a say in the measures or in the solution design, and that the ESCO will just develop and bring forward a solution to their liking that's very low risk and simple. For projects like this, I think I just want to emphasize that ESCOs want to make sure that they're meeting the vision and the needs of the client, and that it's a collaborative effort from the very beginning stages of design. And most work in a workshop approach where there's a constant feedback loop between the organization and the ESCO to make sure that it's being built to be exactly what you want it to be. Each of these are customized, and they're almost co-authored solutions between the ESCO and the client organization. And then lastly, I think a lot of concerns we hear is a pushback on the guarantee itself. You know, is it real? How does it work? What if my building operations change? Then what happens? Will I actually get a payment if savings are missed? Measurement and verification of performance is absolutely critical to these projects. And I think one thing that's changed that's really worth noting is that ESCOs don't use their own approach to M&V anymore. They used to, and I refer to it as the cowboy era, where everyone had their own methodology. It was like the wild, wild west, where, you know, they would design a measure and then they would measure and verify it themselves using their own methodology. And it was very difficult to track whether those savings were really met. And now it's an internationally recognized measurement and verification protocol that's standardized and used across the board. So all ESCOs use the same measurement and verification protocol, which means that it can be third-party validated. And then if the savings aren't met, a check is cut. Honeywell and I think all of our competitors, although it's not often, have cut checks to clients for shortfalls on savings if they're not met. My general recommendation would be to look for ESCO partners that provide a first party guarantee on the savings and that also have the balance sheet to back up the savings guarantee over a long period of time. And then also when developing projects, make sure that they host an M&V workshop, that you fully understand all of the options, the protocols, and how success will be measured on your projects. So if you decide to move forward, what does this process look like? How does it work? What are the various stages? So at a high level, we usually start with an opportunity assessment. This involves reviewing utility information, benchmarking, sometimes having an engineering site visit just to get an idea of the opportunity available. Some institutions are comfortable with this pre-RFP. It's a free service offered by most ESCOs and simply confirms whether there's an opportunity that exists or not to move forward. If there is an opportunity, whether that's identified by an ESCO or by the organization itself, the official process starts with partner selection. So for the public sector, this means a competitive RFP process. There's many existing energy performance contracting RFP templates that are out there for use and modification. So if it is something that your organization is looking into, there's no need to start building one from scratch. There's many that can be requested that are already in existence. And then once selected, you get into the actual solution development. So this is where you'll meet with the project team, review the overall project vision. They'll explain in detail the full project development process, formalizing the team structure, roles and responsibilities, site access, general policies, health and safety requirements. All of that will be reviewed up front. And then the engineering team would complete their site visits, their facility audits. They would do the measure development process, which is all collaborative through the various stages of scope review and scope selection. And scope selection is ultimately up to the client. The ESCO will review the estimated energy, water, and carbon savings. They'll review the greenhouse gas reduction. They'll review the overall cost savings, including potential reduced operating and maintenance costs. They'll review the actual retrofit costs for the project, grants and incentives. All of that will be reviewed at multiple stages throughout the scope development. And then ultimately you would select what you want to move forward with. So the end goal of solution development, once that project scope is finalized, is that the measure details and all other relevant information are documented into an investment grade audit report or a detailed engineering report. And then this report and the supporting contract are presented for final approval. Once that's approved, it moves into project implementation. So this is where project managers would take over, and they do all aspects of the project implementation. So that includes procuring equipment, installing of the measures, commissioning the measures, general project management around, securing permits and managing all of the subcontractors and trades. All of that would be covered under the implementation. And then the last step, once the construction phase is complete, is the guarantee period. So this is where we would do all of the ongoing monitoring, the measurement, verification of the project savings. And then through the guarantee period, the M&V specialist will prepare and submit an annual energy and operational savings report for you. So that's where you would get your summary of the performance to date. Okay, so the fun stuff, how does all of this get paid for? Most ESCOs offer a financing service where they will review different financing options and cash flows based on the savings, the term, the financing rate. So all of these should be explored to find the best possible financing solution for you. The most common historically by far has been just traditional debt financing through your preferred lender. For over 25 years, I think traditional financing has been widely used and remains the preferred model for a lot of public sector organizations, simply because of the lending rates for the public sector. Generally speaking, you can borrow cheaper than any private sector organization can. So in this model, you would secure financing directly and then pay for the financing costs from the project savings. Also, I mean, we've done, and I know our competitors have also done RFPs for lenders. So if your preferred lender is not giving you the best rate, you can always run an RFP for lenders and see what you get back in terms of competitive interest rates. And then the next option are financing through ESCOs, which is available by some, but not all. So I would recommend exploring what financing options are available. But these arrangements tend to be of interest with clients who need to structure a financing solution that is deemed by their financial auditors as off balance sheet, so without incurring debt. There's a few different arrangements available, including energy as a service agreements, which are set up almost like an operational lease. They're considered OPEX instead of CAPEX, which is how it gets around the debt incurment. There's power purchase agreements where the ESCO would essentially own the solar or battery as an example, and the client would make payments for the efficiencies over time. So those are a couple of examples. There's a few others. And then I think in Ontario, just to give a specific example, I guess, colleges are not able to borrow without provincial approval, which is kind of a long, winding and challenging process. So we actually collaborated with Cambrian College and with Canada College on energy services agreements to finance the projects. So we structured financing solutions where Honeywell would bear the risk instead of the client. And in both cases, it was deemed off balance sheet by their auditors. So they got around that debt, the debt issue in order to implement the projects. And then next, there's the Canada Infrastructure Bank. I think this is piquing everyone's interest because of the infamous UT project that's underway now. So CIB's Building Retrofit Initiative is looking to help with financing the capital costs of retrofits, leveraging the energy performance contracting model. So you have to work with an ESCO who will provide a guarantee on the savings to leverage this money. This is the same for the SOFIAC model, which I'll talk about next. But CIB, what it is a low interest loan for the public sector, which is up to 60% of the project costs. The remaining 40% would need to be secured through another lender. In order to access the funding, the project has to generate at least 30% greenhouse gas reductions. And the interest rates are actually tied to that. So the greater the greenhouse gas reduction, the better the rate that you'll receive from CIB. For direct CIB investment, the project needs to be over $25 million, or it will need to go through an aggregator if it's under that. It is a complicated process. It includes setting up a special purpose vehicle for the investment itself, and then that needs to be managed. And there's a fair amount of upfront work that needs to be done as well in order to identify projects and go through kind of the intake and appraisal process with CIB. I know U of T had a dedicated internal team for project management going through the CIB process for their project. And then another option is going through a CIB aggregator, which is ideal when you don't meet the $25 million threshold for direct investment from CIB. Right now, the only two commercially available CIB aggregators, to my knowledge, are Sofiac and Efficiency Capital. There's other applicants that are underway, including Honeywell and other ESCOs. But for this one, I'll just focus on Sofiac because I think Efficiency Capital is just for the private sector. So Sofiac is an investment fund. They have a significant investment from CIB, and then the remainder is from private equity. So Sofiac would actually sign an agreement with you, and then they would also sign an agreement with the ESCO separately. So Sofiac would provide the financing, and the ESCO would provide the design and the build on the project. Sofiac then hires a third-party M&V provider for the measurement and verification. They don't use the ESCO's M&V services. And it's a shared savings model. So typically, I think it's 85-15, where 85% of the savings are used to pay back the project, and 15% are kept by the client to generate positive cash flow. Sofiac claims the debt is considered second tier or non-recourse debt, meaning it's visible debt, but it doesn't impact debt capacity. So they should be able to work even where there are debt restrictions. That's not something that I can claim, but rather it would have to be validated, I think, by your external auditors. And then another offering of Sofiac is to actually just manage the process, where they would run the procurement process on your behalf and select the ESCO partners. So instead of just being financiers, they kind of consider themselves to be, I think, ESCO managers. So sorry, I know that's a lot of information in one slide. I've done meetings where I've talked about just this for probably 2 hours. So it's a very condensed version, but hopefully you got the point across. And then in addition to financing, I think it is always important to explore all of the possible grants and incentives, which can be huge capital contributions to these projects. I think most ESCOs offer this as part of their service, where they would identify and apply for all applicable grants. And one approach we frequently take that I think I mentioned before is that sort of phased approach that we're doing with Canador, where in developing the project scope, we'll develop scope that stands on its own in terms of a business case, as well as grant hunting scope, so that if a relevant grant comes out, we can be in a position of readiness to apply, because the government is famous for releasing grants and then giving you 30 days to apply for them. So these are just a few examples of some of the programs that are set to be recapitalized this year. So the low carbon economy funding, which is in some provinces, but not all. So you have to look into whether your province is covered. And then the Smart Renewables Electrification Pathways Program that was announced in the federal budget to be recapitalized this year as well. And that is a national program. So just a few to keep an eye out for. And like I said, I think that a huge portion of getting some of these projects done is going to be leveraging government funding that appears to be more and more, especially focused on the greenhouse gas side. And then just the last thing here, there's a couple samples of post-secondary projects, all that use different approaches. So I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on these, but Queens, as an example, did a $10 million project with annual guaranteed savings of $900,000 a year. So the payback was just under 10 years. They did retrofits to 68 of their buildings, and it was a very traditional approach with debt financing, and then paying back the project through their savings to their lender. Keyano College, as I mentioned, did an energy services agreement so that they could get around their debt restriction issues. There was a phase one project, which was heavily focused on deferred maintenance, end of life rooftop HVAC and things like that. And then they're currently in the process of going through a phase 2 to build out a net zero plan for the campus. And then U of T, they obviously are doing the CIB project. It's a huge project. I think the CIB financing is something like $56 million towards their climate positive campus plans. So this big initial project, I think it's called Project LEAP, is using the CIB financing to complete very deep energy retrofits. They're converting gas boilers to electric boilers. They're putting in large battery storage solutions. And this actually represents the Infrastructure Bank's first partnership with an academic institution. It's part of CIB's Public Retrofits Initiative, providing financial support for these building retrofits to really achieve like huge energy savings and greenhouse gas savings. And I think they're trying to use this as an accelerator to get additional projects. As mentioned before, the project involves private sector partners that provide the financing while also meeting the stringent performance requirements. So to get access to that money, you do have to work with an ESCO type company. And that pretty much wraps it up. I recognize that was a lot of information condensed into a short amount of time. You're probably sick of hearing my voice. So I hope it was informative, not just an overwhelming amount of information, but I'm happy to have follow-up conversations or answer any questions that anybody has. But yeah, thank you for the time and allowing me to present.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks very much for all the information. You're right, it is a lot. We're starting to have more conversations about how to finance our projects, because I think there's growing ambition and realization that our existing capital budgets just don't, and financial capacity don't, they're just not enough. And so, knowing what our options are and starting to understand what the drawbacks and opportunities are is certainly valuable. So appreciate that presentation and all the information, the expertise that Honeywell brings to this conversation. We're getting near the end of our time, but do folks have any questions they'd like to bring up immediately that they'd like to talk about? I think that there are institutions on the call who are having conversations and starting to have some experience with these. So if they had questions, that could be really valuable. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, the question that I can think of is that the one institution you spoke to at the start of your slides, I mean, it may not have been that huge. Is there a bit of a dollar requirement to be able to, I mean, like you said, you want to look at larger projects, you're not replacing boilers. Could it be a building, or would it tend to need, at least a handful of buildings to hit that kind of size where it becomes financially more likely to be viable for Honeywell to step in with a solution like the ones you talked about?
It can be a single building, a single building. It can be a portfolio of buildings. The main point is that we want to look at a mix of measures instead of just one-off, lighting or controls or, just a boiler replacement on its own. It kind of comes into play when it's that mixing into a comprehensive solution. But it can be one building. There's no minimum size per se in terms of project size. Okay.
Yeah, and the Canada College solution, it was a really interesting slide in terms of the reduction in carbon emissions and the kind of the process it went through. Big spikes, it seemed like in projects that went ahead, probably related to operational things that are going on. Would they have been, and I don't know if you can speak to the details, don't know if we really want to go down that rabbit hole too much, but would they have been using natural gas to heat? I think that's going to be pretty common in Northern Ontario, and then switching to electricity using heat pumps or other alternatives, or what?
Yeah.
How did that look?
Yeah, so one of the projects that's under evaluation right now is fuel switching and electrification of their boilers. So all boilers that are at end of life now are going to be replaced with electric boilers.
Okay.
So it's addressing two things, right? It's addressing the deferred maintenance, but then it's also if they want to eliminate natural gas on their campus. So we're looking at electric boilers.
Really interesting. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm curious to know more about that. If we can, if I could get a chance to talk to Canada or someone there, that would be kind of fun, maybe.
Yeah, I can certainly introduce you to somebody there.
Nice.
Maybe they would be happy to join one of your meetings and present. I'm not sure, but I can make the introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that would be great. I can understand anybody who needs to drop off, please go ahead. But are there any questions that anybody else had? I have mine in the back of my pocket here, but is anyone else got any questions they'd like to ask of Emily? Not. I appreciate everybody's time. I know we've been on the line now for a while. So again, thanks very much everybody for attending. I think we've got some exciting things coming up, so I look forward to talking again in August. I'm going to be touching base with some of you. I've got some questions about the conversations we've had and things that have come up. And please feed me any questions you have about, you know, the financing component or the other projects that we've talked about today with Amy and Leanne and Alberta EcoTrust, because we look forward to kind of engaging everyone on those. But thanks again, everybody. Thanks, Emily. Really appreciate it. Everybody have a great
Thanks so
rest of
much.
the day.
Take care.
Take care.